Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity.
Well, that's what you get for BIM thinking. So we're back with another BIM Thoughts. We have the Dana DeFilippi. We have the Carl Storms. And we are talking about one of our friends, our new friends, the FlyPapers and Sherlock in Navisworks. If you don't use Navisworks, well, you should try it because it really hasn't changed much over the years. So all of the videos and everything you learned for Navisworks, it's still applicable. That wasn't a jab. And our friends at FlyPaper, they made 3 great add-ins to Navisworks. And they asked us to talk about them. And we have a Navisworks expert, we're going to say, compared to me. He is an expert. And that would be Carl. So Carl, tell us about FlyPaper, Sherlock, and the 3 great things it does: Heatmap, Distill, and Orient.
I can do that, Bill, and thanks for building me up as a near expert. I'll take that.
Almost expert, pseudo.
A generalized specialist, I think, is the cool kid term these days. But before we jump into Sherlock from FlyPaper, I must give you a tip of the cap to being able to put a positive spin on the fact that Navisworks hasn't really changed in almost a decade. The fact that, yes, you can go to pretty much any content created and learn because the main parts, all the parts, haven't really changed. I'd never thought of it that way, and it does make life a lot easier when you're going out there to learn the Navisworks. So good on you for throwing that out there.
Maybe they just got it right.
Well, it's funny, they didn't get it wrong. A lot of people, myself included, talk about the idea that there hasn't been a lot of things that have changed. And what's in Navisworks works really well. A lot of people use it. And now that it's included in the suite, the managed, the grand poopah, the one that gives you clash detection, a lot of people have access to it. So there's a lot of value there. On the downside, there are other products out there that are starting to get different workflows where it's not just clash detection, but there's rule-based and code-based, and like Celebri, for example, and people that have tools like ClashMap or Magic CAD that allow you to actually do preventative clash detection right inside of Revit, where you're actually getting things ruled out as you go in place. It is getting a little long in the tooth, but what it does really well.
So is having too many clash detectors clash with each other?
Sorry, too many clash detectors clash with each other?
Yeah, when you have too many clash programs, do they clash?
Well, it does seem like you listed a lot of add-ons. Like, do you use them in conjunction with each other, or like you pick one and go with it?
Yes.
Oh, so this is like Ideate. Our friends at Ideate, they're great stuff.
Kind of like that. You can do both. So you have things like, and we're certainly going to hop in here and talk about Sherlock, but where it's an add-on to improve the functionality that already exists inside of Navisworks. There's other add-ins that do that. BIMTrack, shameless plug, for example. You also have things like Property++, which is a simple add-in directly from Autodesk that just gives you the functionality to see the properties you want inside of Navisworks. And then there's standalone products or competitive products like Celebri, for example. It's would be something other than Navisworks that you would use. But it's funny that you bring that up because this so nicely ties it all back together to my story on how I actually ran across Sherlock for the very first time.
Oh, okay.
So everyone grab a beverage, sit back, enjoy the story.
Were you investigating a crime in England?
I wasn't in England.
Okay.
I was in St. Louis for Built North America 2018. And I was giving in-place conferences. But I was giving a talk called Navisworks is not your only clash detection option. And in that, I talked about a lot of the things we just talked about, different ways that you can either improve upon Navisworks or other tools you can use to do clash detection or even prevent clashes altogether. And at the end of that session, people were coming up, talking to the speaker, having a little chat, and I had 3 different people approach me and say, "Hey, great session, but you really should look into this Sherlock tool. It does great things for your grouping inside of Navisworks." And at that point, I had not heard of it. And when one person tells you to check it out, you make note of it, and you think that's good. But when you have 3 people come up in the course of 5 minutes at the end of a session, and all of them mention this tool, it's something you should definitely check out. So I did. So that's the first time that I really heard about Sherlock. And then, of course, FlyPaper is the company that makes it and puts it all together. That made me to, or drove me to the idea that, hey, I should take a look at this. And I've actually talked about it a few times since with other products and other events, add-ons and things that in place, because it really is a great little tool that you add into your regular workflow without having to reinvent the wheel, as the case may be. It just sort of makes your life a little bit easier.
Right. Because the cavemans invented the wheel, right?
Yes.
Well, speaking of cavemen, I'm definitely one of those people who it's been a long time since I've messed around with Navisworks. I'm pretty lucky at Smith Group that we have like a person on my team that manages Navisworks. It's not me. I do the dynamos, as you guys know.
You do the dynamos.
I do.
Which could tie into Navisworks.
It can. But no, I'm one of those lucky people that, there's the selection sets, there's like those core kind of things that you need to know. But once you know those, you're pretty good to go in Navisworks.
Mm-hmm.
But there's limitations, right? I mean, it's not the easiest of tools, especially when you're dealing with a huge building or a huge Revit model or a campus of buildings, right? And those types of things. And it seems like FlyPaper has some pretty great solutions for the shortcomings, if you will, of Navisworks and integrating kind of between programs, because as Carl mentioned, there's so many, right? And so how we kind of work between the clashes and the model and different things like that, it seems like they definitely have some really nice solutions.
And they absolutely do.
Of the 3, let's start with the one that's the least exciting. And that's probably a bad way to say it because they're all great.
Well, and maybe it's just like the one that does the most basic thing, right? If you will.
Why not?
Because all of them are pretty exciting, it seems like. But it seems like Orient is maybe the one that is, the tool that does one specific thing that's kind of, I shouldn't say basic because it's huge.
Well, I think Orient's one of the most exciting ones, though.
Yeah, exactly. But it does that like specific thing that's orienting to. I mean, it's very intuitive. Luckily, I love these naming conventions.
Right.
Orients you to the exact element that you're talking about.
Because I get lost all the time.
Oh my goodness. And I think that's one of the biggest implications, like I was saying, with the huge models I've seen in the past, especially where clash detection is a really, really big facet in the project, especially for existing buildings and things like that, where you end up having to break the building or the campus down into so many zones.
Yeah.
So that you're confined to a space, not only in your clash report, but also in your coordination effort. And this seems like you could maybe deal with more clashes at once in a bigger space because it's going to allow you to interact with the model in a friendlier way.
But you make some pretty good points there, Dana. And just to be clear, when we start off, the company is FlyPaper, the product is Sherlock, and then within Sherlock you have these 3, we're going to call them features that you can do. And the one that Dana was mentioning, Orientate, is pretty cool. And the first thing that sort of comes to mind when you go to the website and download your trial of Sherlock or love it so much, buy it right off the hop, is you'll find out that it doesn't actually exist in the toolbar. So you open the toolbar, you open your product, and you go, hey, there's Distill, which we'll talk about. There's Heatmap, which we'll talk about. But you don't see the Orient. And the reason being is it's a right-click option. So the way that it works is you're working through doing your typical coordination process. And you're doing it on a big screen, as we all do now, and people from all over the world are joined in on Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting, whatever it might be, and someone has a question. Anyone that's ever been inside a large Navisworks model knows that it's very easy to get lost, especially if you're not the one driving. And so what Orientate does is you very simply select an object, a system, a piece inside of the model, and then you hit right-click on your keyboard, and you'll see there's a tiny little menu that's there that wasn't there before inside your Navisworks that says Orientate, Show and Plan. And you click on that button and it automatically takes you to a 3D plan view of where you are, but also isolates so that only the system or systems that you picked are visible.
So you right-click on your keyboard or you right-click on your mouse?
You right-click on your mouse. Did I say keyboard?
You did. And I think it's Orient, right? So we right-click on the mouse and we click Orient.
Yes.
And that will take you to the exact element that you're talking about.
That's the express way to get to the Orient.
The Orient Express.
Orient instead of orientate. It's all in your English.
It's Canadian.
The Canadians say it a little differently.
Yeah.
But that's exactly right. You get in there, and you select your piece, your part, your system or systems, and then when you right click on the mouse, it takes you directly where you want to go. But the cool thing is that it isolates all those other systems. Yeah. So when you're looking at it, you're no longer looking at the architectural structure or what have you. In my case, I clicked on a piece of cable tray, so it isolated everything that's associated with the cable tray system, and I see it in this 3D view where everything's in place. And what I would say is the coolest piece, and probably by far the hardest part to code, is that it gives you this very big, bold red arrow that points exactly at where you are. And no matter how you scroll around, move, or orientate yourself inside of the model, it stays there. So you always know where you are in place. Right. And so that's the gist of what this tool does.
I call it the "you are here" arrow.
That is a very good way of putting it. You are here. So everyone knows what's going on.
Right. And when you don't know where here is, you're lost.
Or at least not there.
It's like the mall map, right?
It's the mall kiosk, yes.
Yes, the mall kiosk. Where's the gap?
And in this case, it is. It's the gap in my HVAC system. Why is that there?
Right. Where's the gap in my pipe?
Where's the gap?
The other two are a little less intuitive in terms of their naming convention. So we have a heat map and then Distill.
Correct.
And neither one, I couldn't just guess if you were to tell me, oh, this heat map tool. I wouldn't be like, oh, that obviously does X, like Orient, right? Orient is like very intuitive in that way. But heat map and Distill are so cool. Like the ability to, but I do have some questions. And hopefully.
But hold the question just for 1 second. 1 second.
I'm getting so excited.
Because we're still talking about the Orient.
Okay.
And how it gets you there. And that's what it does. The thing is that just like it's stealthy and that we don't see it on the ribbon, you have to right click on the mouse to find it, there's also some other benefits to this tool that you don't really see right off the hop. So the first one is when you look at it, in the bottom left corner, there's this big little icon from a camera. So you can also just simply click that camera icon, and you've now saved a screenshot or a viewpoint in Navisworks of that set in place. So that's simple. But if you want to just slightly tweak your workflow, you can also use that as a noting convention. So you're working inside of here, and not only did you find that there's a gap in your pipe, but now you can write that. So when you go and click on the little thing, you can write in gap in pipe. And so you're making a little note to yourself. So later when it comes back time to have to save that, you can go back and look and say, hey, there's gap in pipe. I click on that, and it gives you a 3D view of that option as well as that overhead plan view. So again, with that simple right click, after selecting my cable tray, I isolated just that system. I created a 3D view and a 3D plan view, and I saved it with a note as the title so that as I'm going back and review, gap in pipe, I click on it, and I'm taking directly there. So it gives you that ability very quickly to save these things, have these sort of visual notes, and at any point be able to get back exactly where I want to go. And the last tiny little piece, and this is really getting into the weeds, but you can also set up in your settings when you're putting together how you want Sherlock to work for you, is you can collect what we call persistent objects. And that means that anything that's already set up as a selection set, like you mentioned earlier, or a search set, you can say that I always want the grids on. And so you can click that, and then whenever you go to one of these views, it automatically always also includes the grids, or also includes the architectural grayed out in the background so I can always see it. So on top of what you've told it to show you, you can have a sort of template, for lack of a better word, set up in the background so it automatically pulls it in place. So it's this one little simple hidden tool that the Orient allows you to do and puts you in place to get everything ready to go.
It's kind of like it reminds me of like the section or selection box tool in Revit, right? Like when you select an element and you hit the little selection box tool, it's almost the opposite of that in Navisworks. At least when you're in the 3D and you hit show in plan. You know, it's very cool. It's very intuitive in the same way that the selection box tool works in Revit, right? When you select an element and you're like, where is this thing? And you like you want to see where it is in 3D. And you hit the selection box tool up in the top, which is relatively new in Revit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like that, except there's not necessarily a button. Like Carl is saying, you have to right click on the mouse and then it says Orient, show in plan. And it's super nice. It's you know, like maybe not as in your face as it should be, but it's a super, super nice tool to be able to navigate that way within Navisworks in a very similar way that you would in Revit.
You know, it'd be cool though, is if it was like a hotkey that you could press and would go to the plan view with the arrow and then press the same hotkey and go right back to where you were.
Well, keeping of that in mind,
yes.
You can also go to FlyPaper.com and they have a Discord, just like BIM Thoughts has a Discord server.
Right.
And you can go chat live on there and get help as well. So maybe that's an FAQ on that site.
Maybe we should Discord them.
I will say also, if you go to flypaper.com//Sherlock, right? Just like Sherlock Holmes, right? It's just the videos are really nice, really short, really concise, shows you the tool.
It's the type of tool that the videos are short, they're concise, they explain what the product does because it's a simple product that addresses, in this case, 3 particular issues. They're not reinventing wheel, they're making a workflow better. And as we'll see when we work our way through, we're going to hit Heatmap next, that's the beauty of the solution.
It is. Maybe that is the beauty of the solution, is that they only have 3 things they do, but they do them quite well.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, when you purchase Sherlock, you get these 3 tools that improve your day-to-day coordination life cycle or work. They do the work exceedingly fast. And as it talks about on their website, they show sort of general stats from the product over time that a VDC coordinator that does this full time using the suite of products that come with Sherlock, on average, save 8.5 hours a week. So that's basically a day's worth of time that they used to spend going through and doing things manually.
Well, what are they going to do with all that extra time?
Let me tell you, they're probably just taking Fridays off. You know, once you get that day off, that's what you do. You know, you don't have other stuff you have to do.
Maybe that should be the thing on the FlyPaper thing. Get Sherlock, take off Fridays.
Yep, FlyPaper. It's sticky and gives you a day off.
Yeah.
Well, like I was saying, you know, we've had projects, you know, firms that I've worked in, you know, DC, where it's existing buildings and 2 inches to the next property line, and you know, all of these crazy things that we're working within. And I mean, the teams end up sitting a full day almost every week coordinating this stuff before construction and then during construction. And so I can only imagine for a team like that, it has to be much more. You know, there's time savings, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So definitely, if you're, you know, working on some of those projects that require, especially if you know, a lot of our clients are coming into us and telling us they want this effort to be done way earlier in the process, which is awesome, you know, because they're willing to pay for it and all the other things. But, you know, this definitely for those types of projects where it is required and you do have a really crazy coordination schedule in terms of clash detection and other things, definitely look into these tools, right? Just in terms of the, you know, snapping between views, if nothing else, with the Orient, just being able to orient yourself within Navisworks, especially for those of us who don't spend too much time in Navisworks and don't want to have to relearn the tool and how to, you know, navigate within Navisworks and the little construction guy that you have to walk around with and all that. Like, I don't want to relearn all that, right? This seems amazing to be able to just get in there and quickly make some decisions.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it such an easy to use and game-changing type tool. And as we were mentioning, the heat map, which again, when you first look at it, although available on the tab, you're kind of wondering what it does. And again, dead simple tool. You basically run your clashes through Clash Detective the way you normally do. You click on the heat map tab. It says, hey, which one of the existing 1 or 500 clash tests you already have do you want to run? And how many do you want to show as part of your hotspots? You go ahead and say show heat map. And what it does is it groups all of the areas on your plan where you have the most clashes. So when you look at the plan, it shows 1 through 10, and 1 is red, and when you get down to 10, it's yellow. So the color gradient slightly changes towards less bad as it gets away from 1. And then, so now I know that at spot 1 is where the majority of my clashes are. And so I can click on that and see all the information that's a part of it. But aside from just giving us this super quick look at, okay, the back end of the building is where we have all the problem. That's number 1 on our heat map. We also have the ability to publish the content that comes from that. And what that means is that we can add a little prefix to all of our clashes so that we know that this particular clash is part of group 1, our worst case scenario. We can also save it as a viewpoint. So that means that any time we can click on, heat map from January 23rd, whatever, and take a look at it. And then we can even create hotspot clash tests, which basically means that we can now go to a clash test that is nothing but what's part of that biggest clash test. And again, all this happens near instantaneously when you pick the button. So now I have all of these abilities to go into my clash tests and to sort them based on what we're looking at. And as we go ahead and take a look at the results, I can write down, and now I see all of these clashes that I already had, but now some of them are grouped and it says hotspot 1 in front of it. So I know that these particular clashes are all part of that very bad spot. Hotspot 1, that's the area where we have those most clashes. And if we selected the option to actually have clash tests based on the hotspot, we can just go ahead and click that, and we now have a group that contains all of the worst offenders that are in hotspot 1 that didn't exist before. So all of those things happen near instantaneously in the background when you use this relatively simple feature, but now we know where the name might suggest, the biggest fires are that we need to go put out. So again, very handy tool that happens very quickly and allows you to get an overview of what's going on. Imagine you're that new coordinator on a project that's halfway through and you're not really sure what's going on. In 30 seconds, you hit this tool, find out where all the big fires are, and you're off and running. You didn't have to spend 3 days getting up to speed with the coordinator.
Yeah, or as I was suggesting a few minutes ago, you're at the beginning of the project, hopefully you have a Navisworks wizard on your team that is cognizant of how to break these things down and how to export out from Revit and create the 3D views so they're consistent, name them, and do all these things, because you're essentially doing that to begin with, right? Like I said, with these huge campuses or the gigantic buildings, you're ending up having to create these zones yourself to better understand these kind of areas. Whereas once the clash is run, the heat map tool pretty much does that for you after the fact, right? It's basically kind of zoning these clashes together so that they're easier to coordinate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, that's an eloquent way to bring us to the last feature, and the feature why most people buy Sherlock to start with. The same reason.
Definitely the coolest one.
Yes, and the same reason most people buy Manage instead of regular Navisworks is the fact that it does the clash detection. So Distill is at its heart a clash grouping tool. So you may have imagined, those of you that have worked in Navisworks and go through the process of grouping clashes yourself, that it's super tedious. And the example that I always give is, you can imagine that if you're working in a mechanical room and there is a duct that runs through 20 joists, well, Navisworks tells you that that's 20 clashes. So that means there's 20 things that have to be resolved. But in reality, in the real world, we all know you take that duct, you drop it 6 inches, you've now solved all 20 of those clashes. So if there was a way that we could group those together so that when we assign it to Bob goes, okay, this is really just one thing, not 20. I'm going to go ahead and drop down that ductwork. Now they've all gone away. If they weren't grouped, he has to go find these 20 clashes that may or may not be side by side each other when it comes to how Navisworks puts them together. And that takes a ton of time. And this is where the real bulk of those 8.5 hour savings come from, is we're not manually creating all of these groups. We're letting the super smart algorithm that's behind what Distill does do that for us. And it's just so simple. You hit on the little Distill icon, which looks like a little potion, which is kind of super cool. and then you decide how do we want the algorithm to do the work. So as you're working through it, it's going to put a little green check mark beside any clash tests that have already been sorted. Then you choose one that maybe has a red X, meaning that it hasn't been sorted yet. The first thing you're going to do is it's going to say that this particular clash test is taking advantage of 3 pieces of the puzzle. So whether it's model to model, search set to search set, however you set up your clash inside of Navisworks, it's going to show you the pieces of that puzzle. And what you're going to do is you're going to help the AI in this algorithm decide how things work. And basically what you do is you choose the pieces of the puzzle that are most likely to move. So in this example, I'm clashing my mullions versus my structure. Well, we all know structure is king. It's not going to move. So I'm going to say the mullion is more likely to move. So it now understands when it's putting together these clashes, which pieces are moving versus which ones aren't. The next thing is we get to decide how we want to look at these groups. And we basically have just a little slider that allows us to go from focused clash grouping to global clash grouping. So the more we slide it towards global, the more we're looking at the big picture when we're putting these groups together. The more we slide it to focus, the more we're looking at the actual instance based of the clashes and want to get very focused on what we go in there. Again, simple slider, which way we want to go. And the last little bit is what do we want to do? So we get to choose which statuses that come from Navisworks we want to create groups in. So out of the box, there's new, active, reviewed, approved, and resolved. So you highlight the ones that you want to create groups for, and you're off to the races. Well, that's not true. You also get to choose whether or not you want to regroup or basically explode groups that may have been created in the past. The first time you run this, not a big deal, you're creating groups, but week 15 of a coordination process, you've done this before. So you don't want to explode groups that you've already spent a lot of time working on, but maybe haven't completed yet. So you don't want to regroup things that have already been created. So again, you have that functionality. And then when you're all done, you just say, distill the tests. And in all honesty, it took longer for me by 100% to describe that than it did to actually go through and run those tests. Like it's lightning fast. And in the example that I'm working on, I had 140 clashes. And when I clicked that button, a split second later, I was down to 40 grouped clashes, just like that. So now we have all of these put into place, and we can now deal with these groups of clashes in an intelligent way. And however we do that, that's up to our workflow. Whether you're doing it manually, whether you're using a issue tracking software like, say, BIMTrack, again, shameless plug. But the other nice thing about this add-in is because what it does is manipulating the information inside of Navisworks, A, it's not changing your workflow, and B, it will tie in with any other product you're using to address those. So whether you're going to an issue tracking platform or you have a proprietary software or a workflow that works for you, it's just manipulating that data inside of Navisworks. So therefore, you don't have to change your workflow with what happens after the fact, and you've lightning fast gone through all of these solutions and made them. So you're no longer trying to solve those 20 individual clashes. They're now grouped together. You didn't have to go through the process of deciding how to group them. The algorithm did that for you, and it's repeatable every time you come into your process. So as they like to say on their videos, this means that because it happens so fast, I didn't have to spend my week grouping all those clashes for that coordination meeting on Friday. We could do coordination meetings, a couple times a week when we're walking through this process. Because this happens so quickly, we can get down to the meat and potatoes and move on. So that's kind of the idea behind Distill, which that's the clash grouping feature. That's what everybody sort of talks about when they're talking about getting Sherlock from FlyPaper. And then on top of that, they get the really cool Heatmap feature and then the highly underrated Orient feature that allows you to take you directly there and has those abilities of creating the notes when you cut into place. So really, it's a really awesome tool, and certainly recommend, especially if you're that person or a group of people that's working in your VDC department that's dealing with Navisworks on a regular basis. This will change your life. So flypaper.com is where you go to check it out.
Well, it seems like the heat map and the distill tools are kind of both, in a way, grouping, right? So the heat map kind of does it based off of zone, and the distill kind of does it based off of type or instance.
So you run the clashes using the out-of-the-box functionality inside of Navisworks. You group them with distill. Once they're grouped, then heat map just shows you where the biggest groups are.
I see.
Yeah. So Heatmap isn't technically doing the grouping. It's just showing you that when you run the clashes, this is where the biggest congregation of clashes are.
Which is almost more useful.
That's where the clash party is.
Where the clash party needs to happen.
Okay. All right. I'm going to throw down the gauntlet here that the next time we have in-person events, I really expect FlyPaper to have clash party stickers.
I like that. Let's have clash parties.
Yeah.
I want mine rainbow colored.
Just like they should be as part of the heat map.
Right.
Yeah. With the oranges and the reds and the greens and the blues.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, yeah, the Sherlock thing seems pretty cool.
Yeah, it does. Well, I'm really excited to have a clash party with them at the next conference, that's for sure.
I'm excited to have a clash party, too.
Well, we're really interested for you guys to check out Sherlock as well, so make sure you let us know what you think in the comments. Or, of course, if you've used the tool, maybe you have it. Let us know what your thoughts are.
If we missed something, let us know what we missed.
Yeah, maybe there's another way of getting to Orient.
Maybe there's something else that we didn't even think of. That's like, oh, you guys missed this hidden feature or a workflow that you do.
Completely revolutionize the game.
Right. I can see before this tool, you go into a clash party. That's what we're calling a meeting now that talks about
coordination clashes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The clash party. I like it.
Yeah. And the person in charge of the clash party probably doesn't even know how to find the clashes or has someone else do it for them, which, could happen. But now with this tool, they could just do it right there in the meeting and say, oh, where's all the clashes for this thing? Oh, man, we forgot to run those. Let's do it right now with this tool. And poof, you got it done. That's what I'm thinking.
It's a magic potion, so exactly, poof.
Right, magic potion. Right, comes out of a cauldron. So you don't have to get on the Orient Express to get this. You just get on the internet and go to their site and get it. I'm sure it's an easy ask for your boss to say, hey, let's get this. It's going to be great. Listen to this podcast. He'll tell you why. And Carl, he really knows what's going on. He's like Stacy's mom. He's got it going on. And on that note, we're going to call it an episode.